Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing another Sharks player review. This time around, we've got Sharks defenseman Jan Rutta. Now, Rutta was acquired in the Erik Karlsson trade, that three-team swap that saw the Sharks end up with Mikael Granlund, Mike Hoffman, and Jan Rutta. This being a cap dump type of situation, which would allow the financials to work out for the Pittsburgh Penguins so that they could take on the majority of Erik Karlsson's massive contract. Now, just because these players were a cap dump doesn't necessarily mean they aren't expected to bring a certain amount of value to the San Jose Sharks. Mike Hoffman was just kind of a throw-in, but a player like Jan Rutta could be quite valuable for San Jose, not because of the type of player he was. At best, maybe he could be a second pairing defenseman, but realistically, he falls more so into that third pairing role, sometimes even like a seventh defenseman on an actual good team like Tampa Bay he was a couple of years ago. But the real value that he would bring would be that experience that he has and the leadership that he could get to the team based on the winning he has done in the past with the aforementioned Tampa Bay Lightning franchise. The Sharks don't really have a lot of that amongst their defensive core. Sure, they have Marc-Edouard Vlasic, who was with the San Jose Sharks during their more successful years, but Vlasic has never been viewed as that much of a leader on the team. And when it comes to a lot of the other defensemen, it's more of just sort of like a bunch of random guys all put together here who don't necessarily have a ton of experience under their belt. The Sharks' number one defenseman, Mario Ferraro, who has at least been in the league for a few seasons, has not seen any postseason time in his entire career. So to bring in a player like Rutta, who has won not one but two back-to-back Stanley Cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and then a third year in a row in which they lost in the Stanley Cup Finals to the Colorado Avalanche, could be a huge advantage for San Jose. And when it came to his actual level of play this past season, at the end of the day, over a full 82-game season, or in Jan Rutta's case, a 69-game season, things honestly weren't that bad. Defensively, I thought he did some pretty decent things. He was thrust into a significantly better role than he had usually played over these past few seasons, and he served it decently well. But having said that, it felt as though Jan Rutta didn't really sort of get to the finish line as well as I would have expected. And I want to kind of reference his usual defensive partner from this past season, Henry Thrun, in this type of discussion. I have mentioned multiple times in the past that Henry Thrun had an extremely inconsistent 23-24 season, which is to be expected at least somewhat due to the fact that he is a rookie in the NHL, and a rookie defenseman is not a very easy role to jump into. And so with Jan Rutta paired with him on that pairing, I thought it would end up like a situation of, Brent Burns and Paul Martin back in the day, in which Jan Rutta could be that stabilizing force and allow Henry Thrun to sort of make some mistakes here or there, and Rutta could be the guy to cover it. But instead, what we ended up getting is that Rutta sort of followed and mirrored the inconsistent play of his defensive partner. There were games this season in which Rutta was honestly a force on the ice, not necessarily offensively, but from a defensive perspective was playing rather well. There were stretches of games this season, like in the case of Henry Thrun, where Rutta was one of the Sharks' better defensemen. But the problem was that there were stretches of games in which he was one of the Sharks' worst defensemen. And I would much rather get a Jan Rutta who's playing at like a 75% level throughout the entire season than a Rutta who could at times hit 90%, but then at times also be down at 20 and 30%. That's just not what we want to see from a defenseman who was expected to be able to be a stabilizing force for a young and defensive core that has generally been all over the place, not just this past season, but for many years, even when Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns were still around. And that's just not what we got. So even though at the end of the day, Rutta really wasn't that bad, it felt as though the journey of getting there was not what the Sharks may have been hoping for. When it comes to his offensive output, obviously it's not something that really jumps off the page. 69 games played, 5 goals, 14 assists, 19 points. Defensively, that's not really super high scoring, but for Jan Rutta himself, this is actually the second highest point totals that he has put up in his entire career, and even compared to other Sharks defensemen on the team this past season, he was actually one of the higher scoring defensemen on the squad, so I guess that's like a positive thing, especially since Jan Rutta never even came close to touching the San Jose Sharks power play pretty much. And so this is pretty much all done at even strength throughout. So I guess it's not that terrible. From a plus-minus perspective here, minus 21, never going to look good. But again, as per usual, we keep in the context of the San Jose Sharks, who had a terrible goal differential. And realistically, when it came to the Sharks' actual main group of defensemen, the usual 6 that they ran with, Jan Rutta actually had one of the best plus-minuses on the team defensively with that minus 21. Obviously, he was not faced with some of the tough level of competition like Mario Ferraro and then his usual defensive partners like, Kyle Burroughs at times this season. But even with that being said, he was usually in a second pairing type of role, still faced some decent competition, so his minus 21 actually pretty solid. Then when it comes to his time on ice, 19 minutes and 43 seconds, that is third on the team in terms of defensemen, a good bit behind number 1 Mario Ferraro, and then a few seconds behind his usual defensive partner Henry Thrun. So Rutta was played in sort of a third defenseman type of role, which does not really surprise me from David Quinn. Like I said, he has a ton of winning experience, something that David Quinn as a coach would absolutely love. So even if Rutta is not really playing all that well at times, he was just getting those consistent minutes. So 1943, that doesn't really catch me off guard. And then when it comes to his actual grade here, at the end of this season, it was a year in which things weren't terrible for Jan Rutta. I would say he slightly outperformed expectations, both offensively and defensively, but because of the fact that Jan Rutta wasn't really bringing that type of effort that the Sharks were hoping for, it wasn't consistent enough, it wasn't solid enough throughout this past season, I can't really argue giving him much higher than a grade of a C. Class dismissed.